Let's start with the measles outbreak and the debate over childhood vaccinations. More than 100 people contracted the illness, many of them after visits to Disneyland. Anyone exposed who hasn't been vaccinated is almost guaranteed to contract it. Some parents, though, choose not to vaccinate their children, thinking that there's a connection between childhood vaccines and autism. Scientific research has proven that there's no link. Still, this week, that debate became political. Here's Kentucky Senator Rand Paul, a medical doctor, on CNBC, talking about why he understands parents choosing not to vaccinate.
I've heard of many tragic cases of walking, talking, normal children who wound up with profound mental disorders after vaccines. I'm not arguing vaccines are a bad idea. I think they're a good thing. But I think the parents should have some input. The state doesn't own your children. Parents own the children, and it is an issue of freedom.
That's an interesting choice of words there. Parents own the children. That said, Paul's statement about vaccinations leading to disorders caught the ear of many in the media, including CNN's medical editor Sanjay Gupta, himself a neurologist.
This is the sort of pandering that can be dangerous because, Rand Paul's a doctor. I'm sure he looks at studies. He knows a scientific method. He says he knows of many children who have wound up with mental disorders after vaccines. I don't know where he's getting that data from. And one of the old adages, Mick, in science is that correlation does not equal causation. There may be kids who have had mental disorders that have also received vaccines around that time in life. But just because those two things happen around the same time do not make one causing the other. So, again, I don't know why he's saying this. The numbers don't bear that out. The science doesn't bear that out. I'd be curious what drove those comments.
That was one of many segments that Gupta did on CNN on a mission clearly to discredit Rand Paul's statements during the last 48 hours or so, using scientific data specifically to do that. How are we seeing others react to those statements as well?
The problem for me is that it's sort of what you would expect in terms of this becoming a political debate and being framed in the 2016 presidential election. Rand Paul, at the very least, and I do not agree with what he said, but Rand Paul, at the very least, has the libertarian credentials that maybe he actually does believe what he's saying. But you have Chris Christie, for example, who is jumping in there and trying to have it both ways because he's running for president as well. I think there are some politicians who actually got it right on both sides. I mean, Hillary Clinton, had a nice little tweet. The science is clear. The earth is round. The sky is blue and vaccines work. That's great. And House Speaker John Boehner was saying, I don't know that we need another law, but everybody should have their kids vaccinated. There is some sanity out there. It's just too bad it has to be framed in this sort of straight political presidential context.
I think part of the issue here, it sort of goes back to when we talk about climate change. I mean, these instances become politicized because one group or another is debating science, even though the information that's out there, the clear facts out there speak in terms of this is actually happening. Vaccines work. Climate change is happening, but it becomes politicized because there's a vocal group out there who wants to basically say, well, this isn't really proven. This is happening and not this is happening. And it makes for a very difficult time for people to really understand what's going on. And I think when it comes to vaccine, the science is out there. You need to get your children vaccinated. If not, it becomes a national health issue.
It is disturbing that we're seeing this growth in the sort of anti-science attitudes out there, and they seem to be tied into the sort of anti-institutional bias that people have now. They're afraid of institutions. They don't believe institutions. They don't believe science, and that's really scary. But I have to tell you, I think that media have some blame that they should accept for this as well. There was a piece that a reporter in Forbes has got out today that was looking at one study that showed that over the past 15 years, the major TV networks just by themselves have done something like 170 stories about the alleged link between vaccines and autism. And so we're giving a platform to people like Jenny McCarthy and the doctor who wrote the discredited report that was in the Lancet several years ago. We're giving them a forum to scare people or to give them something to hang their hat on when they're afraid of getting their kids vaccinated.
And I also think that there's some pandering going on by politicians, not necessarily all of those who are running for president, but you're talking about politicians who are in some of these red states who use these sort of studies to use against their opponents to discredit them in one way or another. And we in the media sort of jump into that because we give them a platform on which to say these things.
So Sanjay Gupta is clearly coming out against it, providing that scientific data. Why aren't we seeing more news outlets doing that as opposed to giving the platform for some of these
I think
anti-vaxxers or these people who aren't buying into the science and giving them a place to talk about that?
I think, Amy, in this most recent situation following on the Disneyland outbreak, that you are seeing more news organizations providing the science and basically trying to say this is the consensus. There isn't any really scientific debate about this. The problem is that this stuff is cumulative, and it isn't just the national media either. I should say, just full disclosure, the journalism school had some egg on its face back in 2008 when KOMU did a 14-part series on autism and the potential connection to that and vaccinations. It was done by a student. We allowed the student to do it. She was really interested in the story, but she got caught up in the hype from people like Jenny McCarthy. She went to some event where she spoke, and all these family members that for whatever reason are worried about vaccines causing problems with their kids, she got caught up in it, and we allowed it to happen and even bragged about it for a time online. So there's plenty of local and national and J-school culpability in some of these kinds of stories.
And to me, I think the one of the big problems here is that the story in and of itself was about what was happening to these children who had went to Disneyland and contracted a very dangerous, disease, a virus, and what was not taking place in terms of their getting vaccination and people making sure that these things were going on. And now that story in and of itself has been lost because we're still talking about, whether or not someone should be vaccinated and whether or not it's connected to autism or some other kind of mental disease. I mean, that initial story has gotten lost, and that was a public health risk there.
And as dangerous as the situation is, you'd think it'd be awfully hard for the media to sensationalize a story like this, but not true. I was watching the Daily Show with Jon Stewart last night, and he was making fun of CNN. One of their correspondents is sitting on the set of a fake plane, and you see this little animated cloud of measles viruses blowing up and enveloping him as he's talking. We can find a way to blow these things out of proportion.
We talked in jest and joked last week about how we could every week do a segment on what dumb thing did Don Lemon do this week. There was even one specific, if you want to know more about it, there's a link on the blog. We're not going to get into it, but even one regarding a selfie this week where CNN, again, kind of got into it in a way where they're just opening the door for Jon Stewart to do stuff like that.